Discussions. They can be a great way to make your class meaningful or a big waste of your time and your students' time. Today, we're going to look at ways to make your online discussions in your online classes or hybrid classes meaningful learning opportunities for your students. So let's look at ways that you can make your discussions more meaningful. First of all, be sure you establish your expectations of what you want the students to do very clearly. Give some examples of things you're looking for in a discussion, and provide a clear list or a rubric of how you're going to be grading the discussions and what you want. Very importantly, you should start participating in the discussions early. If you can, during the first week of classes or whenever you start assigning discussions, try to go in and respond to each post from your students. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's a great way to show your presence and be involved in your class. And it helps your students get established and see what you're expecting of them. Also, if you're someone who expects your students to engage regularly in the discussion board, it's nice for you to go in and model that and also give them more things to respond back to, because some of their classmates may not get into the discussion until later. Finally, I always send out an email to my students before I grade their first discussion, reminding them of a few things that I'll go over later so that they don't get really worried if they don't do well the first time. And that's because I allow them to add to their discussions later and accrue more points. And I want to make sure they understand that so that they don't see their first discussion grade and panic. Start really easy with your discussions. Give a fairly simple first discussion assignment or two, and then remember it's a discussion. So think about your discussions like your classroom. If you wouldn't require your students in your classes to provide properly formatted citations when they're talking in class, or if you wouldn't correct a student's grammar if they spoke in your class, consider maybe not requiring those things in a discussion board. On the other hand, for me, I think it's very important that they listen to their classmates and respond to them. It's not a discussion if each student goes in and just posts the same thing, for example, which shows me that they're not reading their classmates' posts. That's the equivalent of walking into a classroom, shouting out what you think about something and leaving. So I try to make it clear that I expect them to listen to their classmates. And again, that's something I'll talk a little bit more about later. When you're getting into how to deal with encouraging your students, maybe getting them to do a little bit better quality of work, or perhaps correcting some misunderstandings they have about what's expected, I would suggest that you, again, be present in the class discussion and guide it. And on the other hand, if problems arise, I would contact your students privately or comment in the grades. If you're using the SpeedGrader and Canvas, for example, maybe give a private comment if you see a problem with a student's post. But in general, you can guide the discussion and help it to be productive. If there's a problem, though, with your whole class. For example, I've had a class where everyone in the class just basically posted the same example of something, and it was very clear they hadn't been reading their classmates' posts. In that case, I just sent an email to the entire class saying, hey, everyone, remember, these are my expectations for your discussions. That way you're not singling anyone out, but they get the message. Be sure you keep it fresh with your discussions. Sometimes there are things we think are important, but if you think about whether you want to read that and comment on it and respond to it over and over for every quarter for years, perhaps some topics might be better in a different format in your class just for your own sanity. At the same time, make sure you keep refreshing the materials you're using in your discussions. Always be on the lookout for new articles, new resources that you might add to your discussions next time, or new approaches that occur to you. That keeps your discussions fresh and helps prevent burnout for you, the instructor. Be flexible. I recommend that you think about being flexible about what types of posts you would accept and the format or method of posts. I will say that many people recommend that we consider accepting video and audio comments in lieu of written posts in the discussion board. And I think that's great. There are only a couple of issues. One is I haven't yet had a student actually take me up on that, although I've offered it as an option. And two is you do have to keep in mind that it will probably take you a lot longer to grade discussions if your students are posting videos, for example. So prepare for that and plan your time accordingly. Make sure that whatever you're discussing is relevant to your course objectives, but also relevant to your students' interests and lives. And you probably will have learned some things about your students, maybe in your first discussion where you had introductions, and you can try to work in their interests into your discussion, either in the original prompt or in your posts and responses to their posts. So I distribute this image file along with a Word document version of it to my students at the beginning of the quarter, and it's available all quarter in Canvas. I actually have it in the navigation bar so they can get to it anytime. And then I also give my students a quiz that includes a lot of examples and other things so that they can try out grading discussion posts and see how they do, and then get some feedback on that so they get a really strong idea of what's expected of them. So the short version of how I grade discussions is each discussion is worth 100 points, each post is worth up to 50 points, and each item that is like an idea, concept, or topic is worth up to 25 points. They have to make the first post by the due date. And that's how I do things. You may have more flexible due dates, but I find that this makes it a little bit easier for reasons that I'll get into in a moment. So for me, if they don't post by the due date, they can't earn posts on the discussion, even if they post later. For each post, they have one or more items. So an example of an item would be an idea, a question, a response to a classmate, a comment on the reading. I teach music, so a discussion of a musical example or a concept, and each of those is worth up to 25 points. When I'm grading their discussions, I look at three things. Relevance, that is, are they posting about what our discussion is actually about? Thoughtfulness, do they give examples? Do they explain themselves in detail? Do they show that they're reflecting about the topic? And originality, so did their classmates already post that? Did someone already say what they're saying? Again, it's important to me that my students actually treat our discussion like a discussion, and so it's important to me that they read their classmates' post. And then I have some examples of items that are worth different numbers of points so that they can see examples of how things would be graded. And if anyone's interested in obtaining this either in Word document form or in this image format, I can certainly send it to you. These examples are all examples of just one item, so in order to get full credit for a post, they'd have to post a minimum of 2 items, depending on how detailed, thoughtful, and relevant their items are. So then getting into the things I have them keep in mind so they can do their best. If someone else already answered all the questions in my original prompt, they can ask their own questions or go back and respond to other people. I don't require that anyone start a new thread. In fact, I really encourage them not to start new threads and to ask follow-up questions, see whether you agree with your classmates, maybe add further research to what they posted. And I really try to remind them to interact with their classmates. And if someone else picked a song they wanted to discuss, again, this is for a music class, rather than posting a new thread with the same song, they should reply in that post. And then most important to a lot of students is that there are a lot of ways they can earn 100 points per discussion. So it's not a matter of post once and then post a response to one classmate or something, which I see in a lot of classes, and it's kind of an artificial way of having a discussion, right? We don't do that in class. They can post twice in each discussion with excellent, really well thought out, detailed items in every post. They could post a lot of short 0 to 12 point items. So if it's someone who doesn't like to write or isn't comfortable writing really long posts, they can still earn 100 points just by posting more frequently. They can start a lot of new threads, or they could never start a new thread and everything they post could be a response, and that would be fine. They could post something really short, and as long as it's relevant, that's fine. And as long as they do that once by the due date, they can add to it for up to 2 weeks afterward. Or they can post everything by the due date, and that's also fine. Again, I do close it off after 2 weeks in terms of grading, but I keep my discussions open for the whole quarter, so if someone still wants to continue the conversation, they can. The reason I keep my discussions open for grading for 2 weeks is because we have to accept that many of our students don't actually do the work until the day it's due. And it's very hard to have a real discussion with your classmates if nobody's even posted anything until 11 o'clock and the assignment's due at 11:59. This way, it encourages people to go in after the due date and keep engaging with their classmates and read what their classmates wrote. I do make sure they know that I go in and grade their posts for 2 weeks after the due date, but that it's not automatic. I have to go in and read them, so it takes me a little time, and they need to be a little patient with me. And then I like to remind them they have to post once before the due date. And that's the guidelines I use for discussions, and I do find that the discussions in my online classes are extremely meaningful and satisfying both for the students and also for me, and it allows the students to learn from each other as well as from me.